Thank you for tuning into the Final Cut Pro Help live stream. We will be getting started in about 4 minutes. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. Welcome to Final Cut Pro Help Live. I'm so glad you could tune in. If you're watching this live, you know it's the first of the month. If you're watching this on a replay, awesome. You're in for a treat. We're going to answer some questions and do a couple things here. We are testing out a few new things during this stream. So if you see any issues, don't hesitate. Put them in the chat below or the comments, depending on where you're watching this stream. But for today, we're looking at Final Cut Pro Help Live, episode 18. Been doing this for a little bit of time now and experimenting with all kinds of different things. The current format for the show is we're going to run through 5 questions, answers, 5 little topics. If you do have your own separate questions that you want answered, put them in the chat, and I'll do that in this episode. If not, I'll send you a DM, and we'll get that going either through Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all those social networks you see there on the screen. You can find us with @Final Cut Pro Help Live. So the 5 topics we're going to talk about today. The first one, talk about just moving a project into another project. How do you merge projects together? Maybe you have a scene from a movie and you want to merge it into a project that contains all of the scenes. That's kind of what this topic's going to be about. I got a question about that last month. I didn't want to talk about a couple tips just for editing dialogue. This is not going to be an entire audio editing course for dialogue. It's just going to be maybe a few things to look about, some features of Final Cut that if you haven't been using with dialogue can be helpful. And while we're talking about audio, I was going to talk about how to remove audio from a clip. And this isn't just muting it and lowering its volume. It's how do you actually remove audio from a clip so that when you send this to another app, that audio doesn't go with. And then the fourth thing we're going to talk about is how to retain clip attributes. Specifically, I got a question about editing photos. You have a still image that's got a whole bunch of effects on it. You want to keep that effect that you've created, combination of effects, but you want to replace the actual image. So we're going to look at how to do that. And then the fifth thing is a new segment for this episode. This is the first time we're doing it, and I'm calling it the Final Cut Gym. And this is where we're going to work out your Final Cut muscles. We're going to go through and do some repetitions. I'm basically going to give you a homework assignment, and if you can repeat these steps over and over, it's just going to strengthen your editing skills with Final Cut. So this is going to be a repeating segment. I'm going to just do this in the next episode, and we'll see how it goes. And if you have feedback on it, again, any of the social media options or @Final Cut Pro Help, you can send that over or an email. But those are the 5 things that we're going to look at today. So the first thing is how can you move one project into another project, essentially merging projects together. So for this, I wanted to start with an empty project with nothing in it. And we're going to build just a very simple project. And the point of this is not to edit clips together. I'm actually just going to take a couple random clips here and put them together. So this first clip I have is of some fireworks. I'll bring that down onto my project timeline there. It's going to say, how do I want to set this? And I'm going to set it to just those 720p settings. I'm going to use Shift-Z, like zebra, to zoom and fit this timeline. Those fireworks on here. And I'm going to add a couple more clips here. So we have some of the hiking clips, which if you've been watching this stream for a while, I'm sure you're used to. And we're just going to drop this after this second clip. And again, I'm going to do Shift-Z to zoom out of these clips so that we can see the entire timeline. I love that Shift-Z shortcut. And then we'll add one more. I got some video from a hockey game here, just a face-off. We'll drop that in as well. And I can see that we're getting a little bit of lag. I may be pushing the system too hard, but that's okay. Now, these 2 clips are a little bit long, so I'm going to hit the B key to bring up my razor blade. I'm going to cut these 2 clips. I'm going to hit A to switch to the arrow tool. I'm going to delete a clip, delete a clip. So I've done a couple edits, and we have 3 clips on a timeline. This is very, very simple project, but you could go through and edit an entire movie with a lot more complex clips in it. Maybe you'll have music and other things. But now we want to take this project and move it into another project. So there's a few ways to do that, right? The first thing is I could just go up to my library here, and in the center of Final Cut, it has the name of the project. So this project's just called @Final Cut Pro Help. So if I wanted to, I could just select this project, and I can either right-click or control-click on it, or even go up to the menu. But there's an option to duplicate this project. Command-D is the shortcut. So that's one way. You could just duplicate the project, which I'll do here. And now we have the original Final Cut Pro Help project, and we have a Final Cut Pro Help #1 project. And if I double-click on it, it'll open it. Notice the number 1 here in the middle lets us know which project we're in. And that's it. I've duplicated the project. If I hit Shift-Z, you can see there's the 3 clips all there on the timeline. So that's probably the easiest way to go through and take one project, kind of merge it into another. You're just duplicating the project. But what if I want to take everything that's in a project that's already created and put it into another project that's already created? So let's take a look at that. I'm going to call this the second project. And I'm going to go on this project, and I'm going to just delete it and change this one a little bit. So now we have two projects. And let me go back to the original at Final Cut Pro Help project. So if I want to take this project and merge it into the second one, all you need to do is click on any one of the clips on the timeline, do Command A to select all. You can also go up to the Edit menu and then say Select All. And then do Command C for copy. And then we'll double click on our second project. I'll go to the end of the project here and do Command V for paste. You can also go up to the Edit menu and choose Paste. And then if I do Shift Z to fit the timeline, notice we have that original one clip from the project followed by 3 additional clips there. So that's the other way that I recommend merging projects. Now the one final way that you could do it, I'm going to do Command Z to undo the pasting. I'm going to go back to the at Final Cut Pro Help project. And the one way that you could do it is using compound clips. So for that, I'm going to select my entire project here using Command A. And then I'm going to use Option G to create a compound clip. And I'm going to call this the at Final Cut Pro Help clip. Always, when it asks you to name something, this is just a separate tip, a side note, just take that extra second. Make sure you're naming things. It'll help you keep organized, especially in this case when we're merging projects together. So I'm going to call it my at Final Cut Pro Help clip, hit OK, and then same thing. I'm just going to copy it from here since it's already selected. Go back to the second project, make sure that my skimmer or playhead is at the end, and then do Command V to paste that in. Now if I do Shift Z, notice we have our first clip here, and then we have the compound clip that is actually all of the clips from that original project. So it's another way to merge two projects together. The nice thing about the compound clip, kind of keeps things organized. You have the first part, and then we have our second part here. This second part, because it is a compound clip, you can just double click on it to open that up. There's all of your clips. You can make some edits, some changes here, then go back to your full project by hitting the back button here. And this will take you back in the history to all of what we called the second project. So that's the first topic I wanted to cover today, which is just how do you paste one project into another, kind of merging those projects together. That's all you have to do. Just Command A, select all from one, Command C to copy it, switch to that second project, and then do Command V to paste it in there. Now the second question I got, moving on, is tips for editing dialogue. Specifically, I wanted to know they have two primary subjects, and I wanted to know how can you edit dialogue, or do you have any tips for it? So again, this is not going to be an entire full audio course, but I did want to show some tips on it. So I'm going to switch over to this second project. I'm going to hit the Z key. I'm actually holding the letter Z down to activate temporarily the zoom tool, and then I'm going to click and drag around these two clips here to zoom the timeline into that spot. And then when I let go of the Z key, notice it switched back to the arrow tool or the select tool. So here I have two clips. They're very blurred out clips, and that's okay. The point is not to see the video, it's to look at the audio here. And this first clip we're going to say is the host talking, and then there's a second clip here with the guest talking. So this we have two pieces of dialogue. That's actually two separate cameras that we're recording an interview. And so we have the host on one side and the subject or the guest on the other side. So the first thing with the audio is I'm actually going to drag this up and sync it up with the first clip. And there's plenty of videos out there that you can look at how to sync audio together. But let's say that these two audio clips are synced together. The first tip I have for editing dialogue is to label these clips using audio roles. And you can do this by going into the timeline index on the left side here. You can also use the inspector, but I like to use the index here to see what we have set up for these first, and then you can actually go in and change it. So the index, you have clips, tags, and roles, and you actually want to go to the roles kind of tab here. And this shows all of the roles that we're using in this project. Now, roles are kind of, I like to think of it like, what is your role in a production? Maybe you're an actor, or maybe you're the editor, like you're doing here. So actors would get one role, and editors would get another. And that's kind of what we have here. If you have video, it's going to be one role, or maybe you have titles, and it's another. And if you've been editing in Final Cut, you know that when you put a title in, it comes up as purple, and that's because of these roles. And audio works the same way. We actually have dialogue right now, and that's why all of these clips are blue. We could select one of these clips, say the guest, and I'll go into the audio inspector, which is this little, looks like a little speaker icon. And at the bottom, we have our audio configuration, and there is a roles drop-down menu here to be able to see that. Now these clips here, I made little compound clips. So I have my dialogue at the bottom here, and I'll actually double click on this clip to go into it, select that, and then here's our configuration, our role. And it's dialogue right now, and these configurations can be a little confusing, but look for this little caret or little down arrow, and you can click on this, and this shows us all of the various roles that are available, and this is going to be specific to the library that you're in. So if I wanted to, I could say this is music, and if I click on music, notice the clip changes to green, because now it has a green role, which in this case is set to music. Or I could change this back to dialogue because I know it is some source of dialogue. Yeah, it switches back to blue there. Now, if you want, you'll see when you are looking at this menu on the right, there's an option at the bottom to edit roles. It's also over in the timeline index. There's an option there to edit roles. They both go to the same place. And this is where you can edit your roles. So if you know you want to set up dialogue a certain way, or the color coding for your project, you can do that. Now we're talking here about audio, but you could do this with video as well and set up all these various roles, which is pretty nice way to color code things. So for audio, I do have dialogue, which I know that's what both of these are, and that's why they're blue clips. So that's accurate, but we can organize a little bit further by adding a sub-role. So I can click the plus there, and notice now I get a new sub-role. So these sub-roles, you can also go and edit the names of the ones that already exists here. But these sub-roles are just for organization. So I'm going to call this one our host, and then we'll change this one's name to guest. And then on the left here, I can hit the minus to get rid of roles maybe I'm no longer using. Or like here we have dialogue 1 and 2. I could go ahead and get rid of dialogue 1 and then just call this one dialogue. So in all this, you can go through and rename and change these things in here, which is nice. And then lastly, I'll point this out while we're here. On the right side, there's a little color wheel here. If you click on that wheel, it lets you switch the actual color for this audio role. So again, the point of color coding things is to make it easier for you to see the audio you're working with. So select these colors based on what works for you. I'm completely fine with blue, so I'm going to keep it that way and hit apply. And then continue on there because we're deleting some roles, which is okay for here. All right, so now that I've done that, with this audio clip selected, I'm going to go back into my inspector, and instead of dialogue, I know this is the guest, so let's change this to guest. And then if I go back to my project, I could do the same thing on the host side and change that as well. So the guest gets labeled and the host will get labeled as well. And because I made these compound clips, I just have to double click on them, open them up, and mark this as the host. All right. So now I've labeled my audio there for the interview. And what that helps out with is now in the timeline index, you can actually expand the dialogue part out here to show you your various components. So this first thing here is to show or collapse the audio lanes, which notice here now, instead of having these two clips combined, let me go to before, which is here. When you show the audio lanes, it puts your audio tracks kind of side by side there, which is really nice. So it can make it really easy to see what's happening next to each other. And then the other part that's here is the option to go through and expand or collapse sub-roles of a clip. So with dialogue, I expanded out, and notice there's my host, and I think dialogue 1 there is the guest there. So I could actually uncheck or check these to enable or disable a specific role on the side here. So if you wanted to silence one of those, in this case, I've unchecked the guest, which is this one, and now the guest audio won't be coming through when I'm playing this back. So that's another way to edit audio together. And all of these organization components of Final Cut really make editing dialogue, especially with 2 people, really easy because you can combine and merge things that you normally wouldn't have seen before. And feel free to go through and experiment with these features because there's a lot of customization that you can do. In this case, I had an empty sub roll here, so I can rearrange these and move them so the audio is right next to each other. And all of this is non-destructive. So we haven't actually lost anything by showing and expanding all of these components and the sub roles. I can just undo all of this by hiding the index. And if I played this back, it would have sounded the same either way. Now, the other part of editing the audio here and the video is you may actually want to start cutting back and forth between these 2 videos. And that's where it can get a little tricky because if you cut out the video, you're going to lose the audio there. So it may be helpful to go through and detach the audio from the video so you can edit them separately. And you can do that a couple ways. You can select the clip, this is the way I recommend doing it, and use the shortcut Control-Shift-S. And that detaches the audio. So now notice the guest audio is down below. If I select the host and do the same thing, Control-Shift-S, it detaches the host as well. So now these audio clips are completely separate from the video clips, and you can go and edit them on their own. And then the final thing I wanted to point out while we're talking about audio here, I'm going to do Shift-Z to switch over here on the left. We have a multicam clip that I can use to explain this, is some audio clips and video clips have multiple channels. And what that means, some other apps call it multi-track audio, but you may have a clip where maybe you just had one camera and you were recording something, but you actually had 2 microphones connected to that camera. Well, most of the time, Final Cut is going to see that as one piece of audio. Notice this multicam clip. It only shows one waveform at the bottom. If I double click on it, it expands that component, but there's really only one audio clip here. So what you can do is actually select this clip, go into the audio inspector again, go down to audio configuration, and notice if I scroll through this, you can see all the various cameras that are included in this audio configuration. If I double click at the top here where it says the name of the clip, actually it'll expand the inspector out so that we take up a little bit more room here, and you can see all of those listed. And on the left side, I can just check off the other audio sources from these various devices here. So maybe I want all of them to be active. I could do that just by checking them off. And you're seeing all of the different audio tracks that are included in this one clip. Now that's great. That enables all of them. So now it's trying to redraw the waveform so they're all going to play together. And if I double click to expand it though, it's still considered or viewed as one audio track. So how do you get all those separated on the timeline so you can edit them independently? Well, this is where we're just going to go through and expand the audio components. So you can either right click if you have that enabled or use control click. And there's an option here that says expand audio components. So if we hit that, notice now on the timeline here, I'm going to actually extend the size of my timeline here so we can see it. All of the different audio components for this clip are there, which are all of these different recordings. So the audio that I had from the Canon camera, the various iPhones and iPads are all there. Notice the waveforms are different for each of those channels. So these are all different audio components that we can go in and edit. If I hold down Option, I can click on the audio track here and add in keyframes and start editing the volume levels and changing that for all of these. So this is really where you can go through and start having more control with your audio, which is really nice because it can be tricky. I've seen people go through and add the same clip over and over and over again so that they can kind of get the results that they're looking for. But if you know about this audio configuration setting inside the inspector and get really familiar with it, it helps out in editing your audio, especially when you have multi-track audio. So to summarize, what are some tips for editing dialogue? The first tip, kind of out of two, the first tip I recommend is label your clips using roles and get familiar with the timeline index roles section here. And then the second part is learn to use the audio inspector, specifically the bottom section that says audio configuration. This allows you to change the configuration of any of your clips and how the audio is going to be presented and the ability to edit it. So that is the second question. And then the third question that I wanted to answer that someone reached out to me is they were editing their audio, or they were going to edit their audio in a different application from Final Cut. And they wanted to send over they weren't actually doing the editing, they were sending it to someone else, but they wanted to send over their project to this other person, but there was some audio that they didn't want to include when they sent it out to them. So essentially there's some clips that have audio that they want to delete that audio so it doesn't get exported when they send this project out. So you can certainly go in here and lower the volume of a clip, like I'm going to do with this first clip here, this hiking multicam spot. And if you lower that audio, that's great for inside of Final Cut. But as you play the project and edit it, it's going to play that audio back, and it's still there. So you might not hear it, but it's all still there. And usually when you are editing or working with someone else with audio, you're going to send them the files. You might even go through and export this as like an XML file, which is just basically the math. It's basically just here's where the project is, and they're going to get that audio then if you send it to them. So what we actually want to do is detach this audio and delete it. So in my opinion, if you're going to edit this with someone else, and again, try these workflows out to see what works, but in many cases, if you want to get rid of this audio from this clip and send it to them, select the clip. You can either do right click or control click on it and choose the detach audio, or like I mentioned a couple minutes ago, you can use Control Shift S, and that'll detach it. And then you can select the audio and hit the delete key to delete that audio. Now it's no longer on that clip, so when you send it out to them, they should not get that audio. And that's usually how I recommend kind of removing the audio fully. Now as a reminder, if you actually need that audio and you want it for the project, you just don't want to send it out, that's where you're going to go up to your project in the library and duplicate the project. Just right click on it, control click on it, or you can use the shortcut Command D to duplicate it. I usually recommend using Shift Command D to duplicate a project as a snapshot. This really helps out if you're using compound clips or multicam clips and you don't want these projects to be impacting each other. Snapshots can be helpful. If that doesn't make sense, I do have a separate video on that which you can watch. All right, so that was my question there. The next one came over from Instagram, which you can go follow at Final Cut Pro Help or DM me at Final Cut Pro Help, and I can go through and help out with questions you have, so don't hesitate to throw those out there. But this one came in, and they were just wondering, what's the easiest way to replace some photos that I have on a timeline without removing the attributes of the current photos on the timeline? So it can be a confusing question. I'm going to use Command 0 just to get my default layout. And I have a still image on the side here. So let me hit Z and zoom into this image. So then that's all we see on the timeline here. And here I have a picture of a cake. And if you notice in the timeline here and the little thumbnails we're seeing, that's number 1's kind of gold. You see some pink on the frosting. And in the canvas at the top here, the viewer here, we can see that it's black and white. Actually, I've applied a whole bunch of tints. The inspector's got all the different filters that I've put in. So there's a ton of stuff going on with this clip. And essentially what the person wants to do is they say, actually, I found a different picture say, of a cake. I know I have some cake pictures in here. Too many. They look really nice. But they say, okay, I look at it, and actually, instead of using the one that's on there, we want to use this picture of the cake with the flamingo on it. So I say, okay, that's fine, but how do I keep all the effects and the filters that are on here? Because if I drag this down on the timeline, I can drop it on the clip that's there, and I'd probably use the replace option. But if I replace it, notice it's just this picture. It doesn't have all the effects and everything else. So let me do Command Z to undo this. So the way that you keep all of the effects and filters and basically all the attributes of your clip is to copy this clip using Command C. You can go in and do your replace. And since this is a shorter clip, I'm going to do retime to fit. And obviously right now we don't have any of the filters on it. But because I did the copy, I can now use Shift Command V, as in Victor, to paste attributes. And I want all of the effects. I didn't transform it or anything else. I just want all these effects. And they're all checked off, and I can hit paste. And boom, that's all I have to do. We have the original effects from the original clip now pasted onto this new clip that I've then replaced. So that's how you retain all of your attributes from one clip to another. First, make sure you copy that clip. Then later you can paste attributes as long as you haven't copied anything else. All right, so next I see a question in the chat there. It says, do I recommend using H.264 or exporting at a higher rate and convert in another application? So that's an excellent question and kind of tricky. So let me show you the way that I understand the question, and feel free to jump in the chat and correct me if I have anything wrong. But let's say I'm finished with this project, right? I've got all my clips together. I'm ready to share it. So you're going to go up to the share menu at the top right, and you get a list of shared destinations. So one of these options, and probably the most common in my opinion, is to share it as a master file. So I'm going to select master file, and this brings up some of the options. I see the tags and the label and all that good stuff. But if you go into the settings tab here, you can see a couple options. We have the format, which simply means, are we sharing this for video and audio? Because you could just share the video or just the audio if you want a soundtrack. Or there's some publishing options, and this allows you to share and upload at the same time. But in this case, I'm just going to master it. I want to send out both video and audio, which is the most common. But then the second option here is a video codec. And the codec is it's how it's encoding your video. So you can think of it like a compressor, and a decompressor is what it is technically, but think about it like language. So if I'm speaking English and you're listening to me in English, then there's been no compression at all. We're listening at the same, kind of on the same level. So that's where you're going to keep it as source. Source says whatever you're hearing, whatever you're seeing, try to keep it at that same format and resolution there. So that's what source is. Now we could change this to a different codec, which we have a couple here, and there's probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of different codecs or more out there used for all kinds of different things. And very common one is Apple ProRes, which Apple designed a few years ago and is implemented here. And there's different flavors of ProRes. We can see a most kind of the generic one, or the original one, which is Apple ProRes 422. And there's also a really high quality one, which is Apple ProRes 4x4 or 4444. And there's a white paper that Apple has on all of this that explains the technical details behind why you'd want to use any one of these different options here. But there's also H.264. And I'm not going to go into the technical reasons behind all of this, but before I change it, notice at the bottom, it gives you a summary of what you're about to export. Specifically on the right side here, it shows us the estimated size, about 4 gigabytes. And if I hover over this little computer sign, this is one of my favorite features that gets overlooked. This shows us the compatibility of this file with a variety of different other devices. from iPhones to PCs, all of that stuff. And right now, the only thing that's checked off is a Mac. If we share it right now, it's sharing it out as the source, which is Apple ProRes, and that, for all intensive purposes, is really only compatible on a Mac. You can play it on other machines, but in this case, it's just a Mac. So if I don't want this, you do have an option for H.264, which is a much, much more compressed file. Instead of 4 gigabytes, we're down to about half a gigabyte at about 589 megabytes. So H.264 is way more compressed. It's a much smaller file, but it is way more compatible with other devices. So this is something that can play back all over the place. Now you can go back and do uncompressed. If we do uncompressed 10-bit, for example, notice this file is 35 gigabytes in size. That's massive, massive file. So why would you want to choose or differentiate between these various codecs? And going back to the question that's in the chat there. So do I recommend using H.264 for exporting at a higher rate? So H.264 is very compressed. I only recommend, for the most part, using this for sharing. You should not use this for mastering. You should not use this as a way to archive or save your project. And if you think you're going to be editing it later, by going to H.264, you're really compressing and lowering the quality of this video. Now, you may visually not see this because H.264 looks really nice. I mean, that's why it's there. It's a great codec, but it's designed for sending and sharing out to the world. So this is what I would use to send a project to a client, for example. Say I've edited their wedding video and I'm done with it. I want to share it to them. I might use H.264 as a way to send it over to it because it's a small file. It'd be easier to upload to the web, transfer, and send it to them. So do I recommend using H.264? Yes, definitely, unless you plan to edit and work on your project later. Now, the question does say, do I recommend exporting it and converting it in another application? And you bring up using compressor there as well. So if you're going to take this file that you export and use a different application to compress it or change it in any way, if you use Final Cut to send it out as H.264, you're kind of squishing that file in Final Cut, and then wherever you take it, it's already squished, and you're telling that other project to also, or that other program maybe to compress it even more or change it. So I don't usually recommend sending, a compressed file to another application to then change it or compress it further. Really, whatever application you're going to use, in most cases, it's nice to keep the full quality. So in all of this, the asterisk on it is everyone's situation and their workflows are different. So there's, if you're going to put in the comments, there's reasons to do it. There totally are, but it just depends on the steps you're using. So that goes down to compressor. So if you're using compressor, there's actually an option when you go to share your project to send it to compressor. And if you don't see it in the list here, it's not a default option. You can go down and click on add destination. And then on the left or on the right here, there's a compressor settings. And we'll just drag this over to the left to add it as a destination. I want to save this. And then you'll see a whole list of various compressor settings that you can use. And I'm not going to go into details for compressor. There's other videos you can use to learn that. But as far as sharing to, say, Facebook there, that's very similar to sharing to YouTube or Vimeo. You can go on and get a video sharing service, for example. Use one of the built-in ones. Let's use 1080. I'll hit OK. So now I have a compressor setting for 1080. And you can use compressor if you hit change, you can go and edit that in compressor. But then that'll let you share using that compressor setting, right? And you can send it right from here. Or you can skip all those steps if you don't really know what you want us to export it as. You can go File, Send to Compressor. And what this will do is open up the compressor app, which is on my other screen. So let me move that over. And here we are in compressor. And then you get all the same options we were just seeing, but you can go through and customize these even further. So if I was using HD 1080p, I could drag that onto my source here, and then on the right side in the inspector, very similar to how Final Cut has an inspector, in the inspector here, you can go up to the video tab, and you get just so many more options, which is great for how you change and customize this. So with all of this, do I recommend using H.264, for example? Well, that's just the codec. There's actually a ton of other settings that go into how you create videos and what is the actual setting you may want to use. So if you know compressor, if you have it, you can dig down even deeper into how you choose your settings and what you set there. So that's kind of an overview of all that stuff. It gets really, really complex when you are compressing and changing videos. And a lot of times people ask me, what settings should I use? And they want the one-word answer, just click this button and it's going to do it for you. But the further you dig into this, there is such a science behind all of this that it just depends on how deep you want to get. So for all of it, though, the general kind of rule of thumb with all this, with compressing it, is the minute you export something at a lower resolution or a lower quality, you're going downhill and you can't go up. Once it gets lower in quality, you can't really get better quality back out of it. Now, it can be debated a little bit, but in general, if you have a higher quality video, don't compress it down to something low like H.264 and send it over another application. Just try to keep that resolution as high as you can all the way through. And if you have your own workflow that you're trying to build and you want me to kind of dig into it a little bit more and give you some tips, don't hesitate to send me an email. finalcutprohelp@me.com is the address, or send me a direct message on Instagram. Just follow us at finalcutprohelp, and I'd be happy to give you some pointers and tips on there. All right, moving back to the final segment here that I had. We have something new, which I'm excited about, called the Final Cut Gym. And we're going to try this out and see how this segment works. But the Final Cut Gym is some steps that I want to give you there's something you can do to work out your Final Cut skills. So what this is going to be is repetitive kind of tasks that you could do, or repetitive steps that as you do these should help out your skills and build them up. So what do I mean by that? Well, this month here in this episode, what we're going to do is take a look at using kind of marking your clips as favorite versus unmarked and rejected, and using the keyboard to do that. Keyboard shortcuts are some of the most important things in my opinion. So to do this in Final Cut, I'm just going to hide the inspector. I'm going to hide the timeline at the bottom. I'm going to go into my video clips here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Let's take this down to let's go like 5 seconds is fine. And here we have a couple clips, and I'm going to show you a couple keys, and I'm going to use just my right hand on the keyboard. Obviously, you can't see this here, but this is all using the right hand, and you should try this as well to learn this skill of using your hand to mark clips as either favorite, rejected, or even unmarked. So if I hit the space bar, it plays a clip. And if you hit the space bar again, it pauses it. And right now, I wasn't in the browser, so let me click up here on the clip. So there we go. So we hit the space bar, it plays a clip. Here we have a little, this is a drone shot just flying around. I'm going to hit the space bar again to pause it. So that's the first thing. Pretty easy, right? Just hit the space bar to play something, hit it again to pause it. Now, use J, K, and L keys. So J is rewind, K is pause, and then L is play. And if you hit L again, it starts fast forwarding. If I hit K, it pauses. And we'll hit J a couple times, and notice we're quickly rewinding across this shot. And I'll hit the space bar to pause it. All right, so if we're working out, the moves that you're going to use right now are space bar to play, K to fast forward. If you hit it a couple times, it speeds up. Then use the K key to pause, and then use J a couple times to quickly rewind a clip. All right, that's your first move in this little Final Cut workout. You're able to fast forward, rewind, and essentially navigate clips. This works on the timeline. It works up here in the browser, anywhere that you're looking. Now, the next set of keys are going to be I and O. And this is to mark an in point using I. And I'll hit the space bar to play the clip a little bit. Maybe I'll hit L a couple times to fast forward. K to pause. And I'm going to hit O to mark an out point. Notice the yellow line that's on the around that clip there. If I go up a clip, I'm going to do this on another one up here. And I'm going to hit the space bar to play it. Hit I to set an in point. And notice on these green trees, it's a little bit easier to see. And I'll hit O to set an out point. I'll hit the space bar to pause it. So I to mark an in point or a starting point, and O to mark an out point or an ending point. All right, so the first move was just playback, and we use the J, K, and L keys to do that, space bar as well. And then to mark a clip, we're using I and O to set an in and out point. Now, an in and an out point just marks the range of it. The last step in this little Final Cut workout is to mark this clip either as a favorite, which is the F key, or as rejected, which is the delete key. So in this case, I want to favorite a couple points here. So I'm going to go back using J. I'll rewind back here. I'm going to hit I to mark an in point, hit the space bar to play it, hit O to set an out point. There I've marked part of it, and I want to favorite that section. So I'll hit F. And how you use favorite and rejected clips is up to you. The easiest way, if you're new to this, is I recommend using favorites as a way to mark parts of a clip that you want to use. Anything that's good, hit the F key when you have it selected, mark it as a favorite, and anything you don't want to use, you can reject it. So if this middle section, maybe I don't want it, I'll hit I to set an in point, and then O to set an out point, and I'll use the delete key to delete that segment, and notice it rejects it. Now don't worry, you're not losing this clip forever. We've just rejected part of it. I can select that same segment and hit the U key to unmark that selection. And now it's no longer marked, and I've done that. Now if you hit the delete key and this clip disappears, it's because of your menu at the top right here that's currently set for me to all clips. You might have it set to hide rejected, which is usually the case. That's kind of the default. And that way, anything that you delete or reject is going to be hidden. You can go up here as well and show just your favorite clips, and it'll show just the 2 segments we marked as favorite. Or I could see just the rejected parts, and it shows everything that I've gone through and rejected. And you can unmark stuff in here. So that is kind of the first segment here of the Final Cut Gym. It's your little workout, and it's time for you to go and do it yourself. So the challenge on this workout is simple. Just go through and play back some clips using the space bar, and then use J, K, and L on the keyboard to rewind, pause, and fast forward. Once you have playback down, go through and use I and O to mark in and out points. That'll let you select segments of a clip. If you can play back and select clips, you're then ready to use F to mark a segment as a favorite and the delete key to reject segments. This will help you organize your clips, and organization is one of the most important things when you're editing content. If you're not organized, you're going to get lost. You're going to waste a lot of time looking for stuff, and we don't want that. We want you to be able to edit your stuff very well. So that's what I have for you on the first episode here of the Final Cut Gym. And just to summarize what we looked at here, we looked at 5 things. We talked about moving projects. We edited some dialogue. We also removed audio by detaching it. So when you share it, it'll be gone. We retained clip attributes by copying a clip and then pasting attributes onto another clip that you're going to use later. We did it with a still image, but it works with video, audio, all that good stuff there. We answered a question that was there in the chat, kind of talked about compressing video, what's H.264 versus other options, and there's other videos I have on this channel that go to that topic more. And then we finished it off with the first segment, our first version of a segment called Final Cut Gym, and gave you some homework there to work out. Make sure that you understand how to use the space bar, the J, K, and L keys, I and O to go through and mark all of your clips, and then F to mark something as a favorite, and the delete key to reject something. And if you mark something incorrectly, no big deal. You can use U to unmark a clip. So test that out. Let me know what your feedback is in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and follow at Final Cut Pro Help on all the various social networks there. Otherwise, until next time, this has been episode 18 of Final Cut Pro Help Live. My name is Jared Ewing. Thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing everyone next time. Again, send those questions over. That way, we're giving you content you actually care about.